Is Traore about to single-handedly rewrite the rules of espionage in Burkina Faso? France once believed it could easily spy on Burkina Faso, and even after its agents were captured, it didn't seem to take the situation seriously. But now, Traore is determined to teach France a lesson it won't forget. He's planning something so severe, it will force France to rethink its entire approach to Burkina Faso. But the question remains, what exactly is Traore planning to do to the captured spies? Let's find out. Imagine the once proud French Empire scrambling, not to colonize, not to dictate, but to recover its intelligence agents held by a former colony. In West Africa, where Imperial France once waved its flag, 4 of its top agents are now behind bars in Burkina Faso. The tables have turned, and the shockwaves are being felt far beyond Ouagadougou. For more than 9 months, 4 French intelligence agents from the Directorate General for External Security, DGSE, have been detained in Burkina Faso, accused of espionage and attempting to destabilize Captain Ibrahim Traore's regime. Caught with sensitive data, their detention has led to a diplomatic standoff. The French government insists the agents were merely on a diplomatic mission, an argument that grows weaker by the day. Captain Traore, who came to power in a coup in 2022, has taken a hardline stance against French interference, signaling that Burkina Faso is no longer a pawn in France's geopolitical game. Let's start today's discussion with a simple question. How did 4 French intelligence agents end up behind bars in Burkina Faso?
How effective are they? And when I consider the fact that, there was a request to spy on the head of Greenpeace, Kuminadu, I'm asking myself, how many of us are being listened to right now simply because we've said 1 or 2 things that may not be liked by one or other faction of the governing ANC?
The story began on December 1st, 2023, when 4 agents from France's highly secretive Directorate General for External Security, DGSE, touched down in Ouagadougou. Officially, they were there on a routine mission to assist with cooperation between Burkina Faso's National Intelligence Agency, ANR, and France. This wasn't unusual. French intelligence operatives had long been a fixture in many West African capitals, offering technical assistance, training, and, if we're being honest, spying on local governments to keep France in the know.
Absolutely awful and oppressive. You really saw the partisan use of intelligence. I would have hoped that by now we would have come to a democratic system of intelligence that was used for human security rather than for political security.
But this time, things didn't go according to plan. When the 4 agents presented themselves at customs, they were caught in a bureaucratic slip-up that ultimately unraveled their entire cover. Although they carried diplomatic passports, they entered Burkina Faso using e-visas instead of the proper diplomatic visas required for such missions. This might seem like a minor administrative mistake, but in the world of espionage, details matter. The Burkina Faso Directorate of State Security, DSE, immediately became suspicious. If that wasn't bad enough, the agents were carrying phones that hadn't been properly cleaned between missions. These phones contained incriminating data, photos of sensitive sites in Ouagadougou, contact lists of individuals in high-security areas, and other material that one might reasonably associate with espionage. What should have been a covert operation quickly spiraled into a diplomatic disaster. Now, while the French government has maintained that these agents were simply there for routine computer maintenance at the French embassy, this explanation doesn't hold much water. Why would embassy IT staff carry photos of sensitive locations? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Why would they be contacting key security personnel in areas critical to the country's infrastructure? Caught red-handed, the 4 men were detained by the DSE, where they were interrogated and held incommunicado for the first 10 days. French officials soon realized that this wasn't just a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with a few diplomatic phone calls. This was an international incident. For Burkina Faso's government, the arrest of the French agents was more than just a lucky break. It was an opportunity. Captain Ibrahim Traore, who had seized power a year earlier, saw the arrest as a chance to prove that his country would no longer tolerate French meddling in its affairs. After all, Burkina Faso had been grappling with decades of neo-colonial control, and this was the perfect moment to assert its sovereignty. But the arrest of these agents didn't happen in isolation. It is part of a broader rejection of French influence in Africa. So, what's driving this pushback? To understand what's going on in Burkina Faso, we need to take a step back and look at the larger picture. The arrest of 4 French intelligence agents might be the spark, but the fire has been smoldering for years. The truth is, this isn't just about espionage. It's about the unraveling of a centuries-old system of French control over its former African colonies. Burkina Faso, like many other former French colonies, has been caught in the web of Françafrique, a term used to describe the neo-colonial relationship between France and its former African colonies. This system allowed France to maintain control over the political, economic, and military affairs of these nations long after they gained formal independence. In exchange for financial aid and military support, African leaders were expected to prioritize French interests, often to the detriment of their people. For decades, Burkina Faso's leaders played by France's rules. French troops were stationed in the country, ostensibly to help with counterinsurgency efforts in the Sahel, while French companies extracted gold, uranium, and other resources from the country's rich soil. But for the people of Burkina Faso, this relationship was anything but beneficial. It was exploitation disguised as cooperation. The tipping point came in September 2022, when Captain Ibrahim Traore led a military coup that ousted the French-backed government. Traore, a young and fiercely independent military officer, made it clear from the outset that his regime would not be beholden to France. One of his first acts was to expel French troops from the country, ending military agreements that had allowed France to maintain a strong presence in the region. The arrest of the 4 French intelligence agents is a continuation of this anti-French stance. Traore is signaling that Burkina Faso will no longer tolerate French interference, whether in the form of military presence or covert intelligence operations. He's not just challenging France's actions, he's challenging its entire claim to influence in West Africa. This is part of a larger trend across the continent. Countries like Mali, Niger, and the Central African Republic have followed Burkina Faso's lead, rejecting French military assistance and turning to new partners. In many ways, the detainment of these agents is emblematic of a broader African rejection of Western control. African nations are waking up to the reality that their so-called partnerships with the West are often little more than veiled attempts to maintain colonial-style domination. But as Burkina Faso distances itself from France, it's also forging new alliances, most notably with Russia. Why is Russia so eager to step into the void left by France? And what does this mean for Burkina Faso's future? The rise of Russia's influence in Africa is no accident. Over the past decade, Russia has been steadily building its presence on the continent, offering military support, arms deals, and diplomatic backing to African nations looking to escape Western influence. Burkina Faso is one of the latest countries to join this growing alliance, and the timing couldn't be more significant. Since coming to power, Captain Ibrahim Traore has made it clear that his government is seeking alternatives to French and Western military assistance. Enter Russia. In the wake of the French troop withdrawal, Russian military advisors have quietly arrived in Burkina Faso, offering training, equipment, and intelligence support. Russian flags have even been seen at pro-Traore rallies, a clear signal that the country is embracing its new partnership. For Burkina Faso, this relationship with Russia is about more than just military aid. It's about asserting its independence from Western control. Russia offers an alternative model of engagement, one that doesn't come with the strings attached to Western aid. Unlike France, which has historically dictated terms to its African allies, Russia is willing to work with African leaders on their terms. But why is Russia so eager to fill the void left by France? For Russian President Vladimir Putin, Africa represents a strategic opportunity. As Western influence in the region wanes, Russia is stepping in to build alliances that could shift the balance of global power. Africa's vast natural resources, combined with its strategic location, make it an attractive partner for Russia as it seeks to challenge Western dominance on the world stage. By aligning itself with Russia, Burkina Faso is sending a message. The days of Western dominance in Africa are over. the country is no longer willing to be a pawn in France's game of geopolitical chess. Instead, it is forging new alliances that reflect its desire for true sovereignty. This isn't just happening in Burkina Faso. Across the continent, countries like Mali, Sudan, and the Central African Republic are turning to Russia as an alternative to Western support. These alliances are reshaping Africa's geopolitical landscape as the continent increasingly aligns itself with non-Western powers. But while Burkina Faso's pivot towards Russia is shaking up the region, it also raises an important question. What does France stand to lose in this geopolitical realignment? The loss of Burkina Faso is not just a symbolic blow for France. It's a strategic, economic, and political disaster. For decades, France has relied on its former colonies in Africa to maintain its global influence. These nations provided France with crucial military bases, valuable economic resources, and political leverage, all of which enabled Paris to project power across the continent and beyond. But now, that influence is rapidly evaporating, and the consequences for France are severe. Strategically, Burkina Faso was an essential piece in France's counterinsurgency operations in the Sahel region, a vast area stretching from Senegal to Sudan that has become a hotbed of Islamist insurgencies. For years, France has positioned itself as the leader of counterinsurgency efforts in the region, using military bases in countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to launch operations against groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. These operations were not only about security, they were about maintaining France's presence and influence in West Africa. Now, with Burkina Faso and other nations expelling French troops, France's ability to maintain control over the security situation in the Sahel is crumbling. The withdrawal of French forces from these countries has left a vacuum that is being filled by non-Western actors like Russia. This shift not only weakens France's grip on the region, but also threatens to destabilize the entire Sahel, as local governments struggle to combat insurgencies without Western support. Economically, the consequences are equally dire. French companies have long profited from Africa's vast natural resources, extracting everything from gold and uranium to oil and gas. In Burkina Faso alone, French mining companies have reaped billions from the country's rich gold reserves. But as Burkina Faso and other African nations begin to assert control over their resources, French companies are facing the prospect of losing access to these lucrative assets. For years, France's economic relationship with Africa was built on exploitation. Western corporations, backed by their governments, extracted resources while leaving little behind for the African people. But now, African nations are demanding better terms and seeking to renegotiate these deals. Countries like Burkina Faso are beginning to assert their rights over their natural resources, demanding that a larger share of the profits stay within their borders. This shift threatens to upend the entire economic model that France and other Western nations have relied on for decades. Politically, the collapse of French influence in Africa could have long-lasting consequences for France's standing on the global stage. For years, Africa has been a crucial element of France's foreign policy, allowing it to maintain relevance as a global power. By maintaining close relationships with its former colonies, France was able to wield significant influence in international organizations like the United Nations and the European Union. But now, as African nations turn their backs on France, Paris risks losing that influence. Without the support of its former colonies, France's ability to project power and maintain relevance in global affairs is severely diminished. This is particularly concerning given the broader geopolitical shifts happening around the world, as countries like Russia and China expand their influence in Africa and other regions that have traditionally been dominated by the West. The unraveling of Françafrique, the neo-colonial system that has allowed France to maintain control over its former colonies, marks the end of an era. French influence in Africa is rapidly fading, and with it, France's ability to shape events on the continent and beyond. The loss of Burkina Faso is just the beginning of what could be a much larger collapse of French power in Africa. But while France's influence is waning, a larger question looms. Could Burkina Faso's bold stance against France inspire other African nations to follow suit? Are we witnessing the beginning of a new era of African sovereignty? The detainment of French intelligence agents in Burkina Faso is not just an isolated incident, it is part of a much larger movement that is sweeping across Africa. For too long, African nations have been trapped in a cycle of dependency on their former colonial powers, forced to accept exploitative economic deals, unequal military agreements, and political interference. But now, countries like Burkina Faso are standing up and asserting their sovereignty, demanding an end to neo-colonial control. Captain Ibrahim Traore's government, with its strong anti-French stance, represents a new wave of African leadership that is no longer willing to play by Western rules. Traore's decision to arrest French agents, expel French troops, and seek new alliances with non-Western powers is a bold move that challenges the very foundations of French influence in Africa. And his actions are resonating far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Across the continent, we are witnessing a resurgence of Pan-Africanism. The idea that African nations should unite to protect their interests, assert their independence, and break free from Western control. This movement is being driven by a growing awareness of the exploitative nature of Western involvement in Africa, as well as a desire for African nations to chart their course in global affairs. Countries like Mali, Niger, and the Central African Republic have already followed Burkina Faso's lead, rejecting French military support and seeking new partnerships with powers like Russia and China. These alliances are allowing African nations to break free from the economic and political shackles that have kept them dependent on the West for decades. But the movement towards African sovereignty is not just about military alliances. It's also about economic independence. For years, Western corporations have extracted Africa's natural resources, leaving behind environmental destruction and economic inequality. Now, countries across the continent are beginning to renegotiate these exploitative deals, demanding greater control over their resources and a fairer share of the profits. This shift is particularly evident in the mining industry, where countries like Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and the Democratic Republic of Congo are pushing back against Western mining companies and asserting their rights to their natural wealth. By taking control of their resources, these countries are not only securing their economic future, but also sending a powerful message to the rest of the world. Africa will no longer be exploited. The movement towards sovereignty is also cultural. Across Africa, countries are rediscovering and embracing their own identities, rejecting the Western cultural dominance that has long shaped the continent. From the resurgence of traditional African art and music to the growing popularity of African languages and customs, the continent is undergoing a cultural renaissance that is deeply tied to its political awakening. Burkina Faso's actions are a symbol of this larger movement. The country's bold stance against France is inspiring other African nations to assert their sovereignty and reject the unequal relationships that have defined their interactions with the West. As more countries follow Burkina Faso's lead, we are witnessing the collapse of the old colonial order and the birth of a new era of African independence. To sum this up, the detainment of French intelligence agents in Burkina Faso is about much more than a diplomatic act. It is a symbol of the shifting balance of power in Africa. For centuries, France and other Western powers have controlled the continent through a combination of military, economic, and political influence. But now, African nations like Burkina Faso are standing up and demanding their right to self-determination. Captain Ibrahim Traore's government is leading this charge, rejecting French interference and seeking new partnerships with powers like Russia that respect African sovereignty. The arrest of the French agents is a bold move that signals Burkina Faso's determination to break free from its colonial past and forge a future on its terms. For France, this is a moment of reckoning. The loss of Burkina Faso is just the latest in a series of setbacks for French influence in Africa, and it raises serious questions about France's ability to maintain its status as a global power. As more African nations assert their sovereignty and seek new alliances, France risks becoming a diminished player on the world stage. But for Africa, this is a moment of liberation. The continent is waking up to its power, rejecting the exploitative relationships that have held it back for so long. Burkina Faso's actions are just the beginning. Across Africa, nations are reclaiming their sovereignty, renegotiating their economic relationships, and embracing their cultural identities. The message is clear. Africa is no longer willing to be a pawn in someone else's game. The future belongs to those who are bold enough to claim it, and Burkina Faso is leading the charge. As the world watches this diplomatic standoff unfold, one thing is certain: Africa's path to true independence has only just begun. Could Burkina Faso's handling of the spies mark the beginning of the end for French intelligence operations in Africa? Will France dare to pull the same stunt again after this? Let us know in the comments. Has Africa truly shifted the power dynamics? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.